Hello, so this is going to be a very different sort of video. It's going to be a live drawing video, sort of, at 2 times speed, and a book review of Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. So, the drawing is basically just an alien, as you could probably tell by the title. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm hoping that the audio doesn't go 2 times speed, but I'm not sure about that, and I'm hoping the video doesn't actually mess up when I'm doing it, but if it does, then I'll just have to do it again, or maybe do it in a different way. Anyway, so I finished reading this book maybe about a week ago. I can't remember exactly, but I did enjoy reading it. At first I thought it was just going to be extremely depressing and maybe a little bit boring, but it wasn't that at all. It was really interesting, and it made me sort of look at life in different ways, and it also caused some emotions to arise in myself, because I guess when you read books, when you read maybe fiction especially, you get to experience life from a different perspective of which you've never really experienced life before. So for example, I've never really been on my deathbed. Like, I've probably had times in my life where I thought I was going to die, but it's not quite the same as actually being in bed completely sick and ill and in pain and knowing that you're about to meet your inevitable demise. So this book sort of allowed me to experience that in some ways, but not just from the perspective of Ivan Ilyich, who is the man who's dying, but also from the perspective of his friends and family and how they went through it, and also made me question, what am I going to do when people I love die? How am I going to react? And yeah, so it's sort of like the morality of death. So at the back of the book it says, laying humanity bare, these two devastating stories ask, is it possible to have a good death, and what does it mean to truly live? So those are two quite philosophical questions, and I think they've been explored adequately in this book, perhaps better than adequately maybe. So I think he really starts to question, what does it mean to truly live at the end of his life. So he starts to become worried about whether his life has been the good life, because he was I think he was a barrister, or he worked in a courtroom, and or I think he was a judge actually. And he loved doing that. That's all he wanted to do. He wanted to spend his whole life focusing on his career and just being a good judge. And he thought that was good. He thought that was what he should have been doing. But it wasn't until the end of his life that he started questioning that maybe he actually lived his life wrong, and that wasn't how he was supposed to live his life, and that's why he's in the position that he's in now. And I found that quite interesting, because I think when we get to a certain age, we do start to question whether our lives have been worthwhile, whether we spent our lives doing the things that we should have been doing. And I guess what we can take from that is that we should always, I guess, try to live our lives in the best possible way, so that when we get to an old age and when we're laying on our deathbed, we're able to look back in happiness rather than in regret and say, oh, maybe I should have done things differently. But with Ivan Ilyich, I don't necessarily think that he wasted his life. Like, he got a good career, he had a family, they did spend a lot of time arguing at certain points in the book, but he did seem to have a good life in many ways. But you know, he still ended up asking these questions. So maybe no matter what we do, we're always going to be in a position at the end of our lives thinking that we could have done better, or we could have done more, or we could have done it differently. And perhaps if we had done it differently, then we wouldn't be in the position we are now. And I guess that sort of links to, is it really possible to have a good death, which is one of the questions explored in the book also. And is it possible to have a good death? Because, well, if you've had a good life, then presumably you might be able to have a good death, because you won't be suffering in the way that you won't be suffering through the means of regret. So regret can cause a lot of suffering, but if you live a good life, then presumably you won't have many regrets. Therefore, that's one less thing to suffer about when you're on your deathbed. However, Ivan Ilyich, he does seem to suffer on his deathbed, both physically and mentally, because he's constantly going around it in his mind, and this also causes him to push away his family, so he becomes very withdrawn and he just wants to be by himself a lot, and he thinks that nobody understands, and it's it's quite interesting. But I think this book, based on this alone, if I'd never had any sort of experience of life and there was no other experiences to be had, would suggest that a good death is almost impossible. Because the death that Ivan Ilyich has is definitely not a good death at all. Also, I'm going to point something out. So, in the copy that I have, which is the Penguin Classics copy of the book, it says at the start, on the first page, "It is only a bruise," in quote marks, and then that's just otherwise a blank page. And I didn't really understand that at first, so I looked at it, and then last night when I was... I don't know why, but I was like flicking back through the book, just looking at it. I noticed that again, and I was like, oh, well, at one point in the book, Ivan Ilyich, he's decorating his new house that he got after he got a new job, and he ends up falling off a stepladder and hurting his side, and he said any other man who'd gone through that probably wouldn't have survived. And he got a bruise, which was painful, but he was one of those men who didn't survive. It just affected him in a different way, so it led to him having extreme pains in his side, and the doctors couldn't necessarily agree upon what had caused it and what was happening within him. And I think that was probably the result of him falling off the stepladder, and he almost puts himself higher than other men in that situation. He says, well, other men would have died, but I survived, so I'm almost special. It's like a degree of narcissism, I guess. And I guess no one's above death, no one's above life even, so we just can't necessarily escape the sufferings of life, and sometimes things happen that are just out of our control. And yeah, I don't know, I just think it is a good book. And I think what's interesting about the book as well is it's the layout of the book. Like, it starts with Ivan Ilyich already dead, and all the men gathering round, and then wondering how his death is going to affect them. So I said at the start that he works in a courtroom. So when he's at work in this courtroom, obviously he's in quite a high up position. And then when he dies, all of the other men are sort of conferring, wondering whether they are going to be able to take his position. Are they going to be able to get a raise? And I think that sort of suggests something about the selfishness of human nature. We're not necessarily always just interested in the moralistic thing to do, which would be to truly care about this man's death. Because he was one of our friends from the perspective of his friends. They're also thinking about other things like what can they get out of it? How can they benefit from this man's death? And I think maybe that is a part of human nature, or maybe that just suggests something that Tolstoy thought about human nature. Perhaps he was quite cynical and assumed that people had negative motivations or wanted or were just inherently selfish, I guess. So I think that's quite interesting as well. And I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it, to be honest. Try and find... Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think I've covered everything. I've still got a little bit of time left on this video, about 5 minutes-ish. So I might just talk about the drawing for a little bit. So the drawing is, as you can see, an alien with an eye on its belly at this point. I don't know if where I'm talking is actually the part of the video that you can see, but that's what it is. So I just when I draw, I just like start drawing. I don't necessarily plan what I'm gonna do before I do it. So I might start with some lines, or it might start with some dots or anything like that, or just a shape, and then I'll just build out from that. And this one I decided to turn it into an alien. I'm not completely happy with it, because usually I I don't know, spend I guess a lot more time on it, but I didn't want to because I said previously that I don't have a tripod, or actually said that in the description of my previous video that I don't have a tripod. So I had to just basically hold the phone resting on my leg in my left hand while drawing with my right hand. So I'm gonna have to invest in one of those. But yeah, I just like drawing strange things. This is sort of like something I've drawn before, but without the alien's head. So I've tried to do this style of like blobby body where it looks like it's just like, well, I guess completely alien. And then yeah, and I don't know why I did the lobster claw coming out of his head or the eye in his belly or anything like that. They were just sort of spontaneous decisions that I decided to make. I think it could be a lot better, and I'm probably gonna do a part 2, where I finish it off with details, and that should make it look a lot better than it is now. But I think it's okay for the time being. Yeah. Now we'll go find something to talk about for another 5 minutes, I think. I don't know, 4 minutes. Yeah. Not very good at these sort of commentary things. Maybe I should plan more ahead before what I want to talk about beforehand. But I guess I've never made this sort of video before, so that's okay. Last night I was up pretty late doing this sort of thing, and then after I'd finished, or after I couldn't really be bothered drawing anymore, I just sat and I was writing quotes. So I might read some of them out. I wasn't really thinking about them. I was just like writing them as they came into my mind. So yeah, and you can just take them as you will, I guess. They're definitely down to interpretation. I wouldn't say there was a specific meaning behind each of them, but I guess you can derive your own meanings from them. That's if I can find them. So some of them were about art and language and stuff like that. So the first one says, the artist expresses through images that which cannot be spoken with words. Yep. The language of art is alien. Words represent images. We speak what we see. If we don't, then we are insane. Okay, and then this next one's sort of like a link to Kierkegaard, but I guess I expanded a little bit. So Kierkegaard said, labels negate, and I said, images validate. So that was like, yeah, I guess a play on words there. Everything in this world is powerful enough to destroy us, occasionally without our consent. So that one there was sort of like a reference to Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And I just sort of decided, well, I guess it's kind of like pessimistic. It's like, oh, we're not strong enough to withstand the powers of the world. Which sometimes I think we're not, you know. We like to, I guess, big ourselves up and think that we should be strong and able to overcome anything, but I don't think that's always possible. But, you know, maybe you shouldn't be saying them sorts of things. But I think there is a degree of truth to it. I can tell you things about you that you didn't know but are true. So this is sort of the idea that we don't necessarily know ourselves, but when we interact with people, people can tell us things about ourselves that we don't necessarily see because we're blind to them. Because in order to be able to see them, we have to be looking in from an outside perspective, because we're just, I guess, oblivious. And I think that one's also true. Art sometimes is our only means of expression, so I guess that's suggesting that we can't always use words to be able to describe our experience or describe what's going on. Sometimes we just have to be able to draw it, I guess. To create is to live is to create. And that's not necessarily live as in be alive, but it's more like to have a life and do something of worth. This one was a little bit more philosophical, I guess. None of what I say is definitively true. A speck of epistemological doubt about existence discredits all we think we know. I don't believe this, of course. So that's just basically about that we can't know whether we actually exist. If we can doubt existence, then nothing that we say within existence is definitively true, but I don't necessarily believe that. Anyway, this video is pretty much finished, so I'll just say thank you for watching, and watch part 2 if you have enjoyed.